Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Happy, healthy, peaceful 2023 to you and yours. I hope it's a year full of things for which you are grateful. And speaking of gratitude, I am extremely grateful that you have chosen to be here with us today, or welcome to day one, session one of the Urban Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Training Program. My name is Donna Onis Blake. I'm the Jamaica Program Director for the Nature Conservancy. So the Nature Conservancy, or TNC for short, is partnering with the United Nations Environment Program to implement components of its CityAdapt project in Jamaica. The goal of that project is to build the capacity to adapt to the effects of climate change through the integration of EbA, ecosystem-based adaptation, also called EbA, into urban planning. So under this project, we are implementing initiatives designed to create an enabling environment for mainstreaming ecosystem-based adaptation into medium and long-term urban and peri-urban development planning. So this project is being implemented in partnership with the government of Jamaica, specifically the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. So why we're here today is that one key component is training, and the training is focused on strengthening the technical capacity of government, academia, private sector stakeholders that work in the areas related to urban and peri-urban development, natural resource management, climate change adaptation, and other related areas. So you all are participating with us in a training program designed to enable the implementation of climate change adaptation interventions using an urban EbA approach and integrate EbA into spatial planning, urban and regional planning, policy and regulation development, and so on. So allow me about 1 minute to tell you who is the Nature Conservancy. So who is TNC? Some of you know us very well. I recognize many names here, and welcome to you. But there are going to be persons here who have not heard of us before. So I will just say we are a not-for-profit organization. We have staff of over 3,000 now, working in more than 70 countries. We've been working in the Caribbean and Jamaica for more than 30 years. So we have a very, I like to say, lofty mission. So we are partnering with communities to create a world where people and nature thrive. We've been doing this since 1951. Today, many of you, I don't need to tell you this, we are facing the most complex challenge of our lives. And we have years, not decades, to address the interconnected climate and biodiversity crisis. Together, we and our partners like you find a way to overcome barriers to progress so we can achieve our biggest, most ambitious goals yet. So the Nature Conservancy is a global organization. We've been working in the Caribbean and Jamaica for more than 30 years, and we have developed some priorities under which this particular activity fits. So we're looking to ensure healthy and productive oceans, protect and restore and monitor coral reefs. But today, this work is really most focused on safeguarding against the impacts of climate change, under which we have activities for climate adaptation and mitigation. One of the key pillars we are focused on is using nature-based solutions as a means to adapt to climate change. So hence, this urban EbA training and the work we're doing under the CityAdapt project fits nicely under that priority for the Caribbean and for Jamaica. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mrs. Bedward Grant, who is the UNEP CityAdapt Jamaica lead. Over to you, Shanice.
Thanks, Donna. Good morning, everyone. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us today for this training. I do hope that you'll be able to stay the course and to complete the course with us. I am Shanice Bedward Grant. I'm the National Coordinator for the CityAdapt project here in Jamaica. And also with me is Danielle Kitson, and she's the Technical Advisor for the CityAdapt project in Jamaica. The long name for the project, Building Climate Resilience of Urban Systems Through Ecosystems-Based Adaptation in Latin America and the Caribbean project. And in short, we call it the CityAdapt project. The project is being implemented in the Latin American and Caribbean region in 3 countries, and in particular 3 cities. So in Mexico, it's been implemented in Jalapa, in El Salvador, in San Salvador, and in Jamaica, in Kingston. This is a unique project in that we're trying to use, or we're trying to show how EbA can be used to adapt to the effects of climate change in urban spaces. So there has been a lot of EbA projects, but a lot of them tend to focus largely on rural areas. The project is being implemented with 3 partners in Jamaica: the Nature Conservancy, who is working on component 1 largely, and a part of component 2. They focus on conducting a vulnerability assessment, which will give us an idea of where we stand, well, within Kingston, as it relates to how vulnerable we are to the effects of climate change and what areas are vulnerable, and what are some scenarios, using climate change scenarios, that they can use to project what could happen, and then what are some things that we can do using nature-based solutions to combat some of these issues. Component 2 is largely being done by the Jamaica Forage Club and the Forestry Department. The component looks at using pilot activities. So installing rainwater harvesting systems in schools, installing permeable pavements, training persons in alternative livelihoods, and reforestation, particularly in urban areas and in the upper watershed. So it's putting actual examples out there to see how these things can assist in combating some of these issues that we face under climate change. The training component that you're a part of today falls under component 1, which looks at how can we mainstream EbA into local development planning in the medium and long term. As far as I understand, most persons here work within that area. And so it is fitting that we come together as the practitioners, as the persons who are making these decisions, as the persons who are giving advice. And once we can receive that training and we can absorb it and we can see how can this now fit into our daily activities, I think that would be a great outcome of this training. Again, thank you for taking the time to be a part of this. You can visit CityAdapt.com to get more information on the project, or you can reach out to us. We know we might have contacted some of you in other areas or in other areas of the project, but feel free to reach out to us for additional information, as we do want this to be successful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Denise, giving the overview of the project there and for your greetings. I am just going to introduce to you our presenter. She has a very long bio, out of which I'm going to select a few paragraphs to share with you, and then I will hand over to her. So Ms. Elizabeth Emmanuel is our trainer. She's an international development expert with over 20 years of development experience, working primarily with small island and coastal states. Since 2009, she has been leading the technical assistance and corporate communications portfolio of the CRIF, Caribbean Climate Risk Insurance. Give me that correct name, Liz. I can never remember it. Caribbean Climate Risk.
Catastrophe Risk Insurance.
Catastrophe Risk Insurance Fund. Yeah, thank you. So she has been leading that portfolio, the Technical Assistance and Corporate Communications portfolio of CRIF. She's worked extensively in public policy, disaster risk management and financing, development planning, environmental management, climate change adaptation, environmental education, and project management. She also has a track record of success in engaging a wide range of stakeholders using people-centered and participatory processes in the public sector, local communities, academia, private sector entities, youth, and several vulnerable groups, and successfully developing partnerships and collaborative arrangements geared toward advancing country sustainability agendas. She's written several national policy documents, development plans, policy briefs, training manuals. She's an excellent communicator and can translate highly technical concepts into simple language for a wide variety of stakeholders. She's worked for a number of UN organizations, has extensive experience working with governments in the Caribbean in areas such as disaster risk financing, environmental management, energy, transport management, sustainable development planning, among others. She has a BSc in economics, an MSc in development studies, and certification in mass communication, stakeholder engagement, and designing participatory processes, etc. So I hand over you now to Ms. Elizabeth Emmanuel. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Happy New Year to you and wishing you all the best, you and your families, for 2023. But before I even get into what we're going to do, we have a little test that we're asking you to take. It's actually, the link for it is in the chat. Okay, so I have a person in my class, Arpita, thank you, she did it. So click the link, you can click the link, you go into it. One of the things I would ask you not to do is not to automatically, you may see by email, your email automatically pops up. Please ignore that and type in your email. Otherwise you may, and on some machines, persons get difficulty with submitting. Make sure you say you're not a robot. All right. So the robot's telling us to say that we're not a robot. So 5 minutes, we're at 9:58. So that would take us to 10:03. Just asking you to complete very quickly. It's not a real test in the true sense of the word. I think everybody would probably get 100%. And what I will do while you're doing that, I'm going to throw up very briefly a slide and ask you to comply with that slide by using the chat. It is about 50 of us in here. Well, it's 58, but if we minus 5 of us, we're probably at 53. So it's going to be a bit difficult to do introductions, you know, to have everyone introduce themselves. So I'm going to try to be a little innovative and ask you to do that via the chat, but with a specific instruction. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share that particular quick exercise that I'm asking you to do. Is everyone seeing my screen? I'm going to make it big. Everybody seen my screen? Anybody seen my screen? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Thank you,
Yes,
Denise. Thanks. So in the chat, just state your name and organization. Well, you don't really have to state your name because your name would be in the chat. Your organization, and just something about yourself. And we're not going to talk about, oh, well, I'm the director of whatever, or, you know, just one thing. What do you think is the most useless thing in your home? You could, any one of those. So we just get a sense of who you are. I did this exercise some years ago, and interestingly, someone said that their partner was the most useless thing in their home. So if you had a superpower, what would it be? And I've given some of my examples. I can't think of the most useless thing in my home. And by a show of hands, I'm also going to ask you to tell me when you have completed the survey. So I think one person just joined. So in the chat, you would actually see this survey. And I'm going to ask Anna to please just put back the link in the survey again, the link for the survey in the chat again, given that I'm on this screen. But you're not answering my question, Arpita. Nobody's. One thing, so after Nadine Brown, Planning Institute of Jamaica, you could put one thing, like an ion. I mean, that makes it more interesting, for example, if that's the most useless thing in your home. So just put a comma. Right, so that's an interesting one, Camille, to eat anything you want to eat and still stay with that nice physique. So you can read in terms of where others are. So your name, comma, organization, and whatever, the artist you are most embarrassed to admit you like. So if that is Shabba Ranks and, oh, I don't know, I mean, whoever, popcorn, I don't know. So just add something so we can start off on a little exciting note. So given that everyone has seen this screen, okay, so far I think we have 6 free tests done. So waiting on the 50 others. I think we have about 7 now. I'm sure some of these responses put a smile on your face. So if you're finished with your survey, you can be in the chat. Let us know who you are, which organization you're from, and either what is, comma, what is the most useless thing in your home, the song that you're embarrassed or the artist that you're embarrassed that you really like, or the superpower you wish you had. And remember, it's a song that, you're embarrassed to really like that. So mine is bad. I said mood. I'm sure some of you don't know what that is. So for those joining us now, welcome. I did see Roseanne. Welcome. And we are doing a short pre-test. So again, I'll ask Anna to insert that pre-test in the link so that we can get going with our main agenda. Okay, welcome to those that just joined. welcome to those that just joined. We are doing a pre-test as well as introducing ourselves in the chat. Introducing ourselves in the chat, name, organization, and either the most useless thing in your home or the song or artist you are most embarrassed to say is your favorite song or artist. And what's the third one? If you had a superpower, what would it be? So any one of those, just choose what you want to share. Can I get a show of hands in terms of how many people have actually completed the test? I mean, I could see it. I could see what's coming in. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We have about 17 coming in. I'm actually seeing what is coming in, so please complete. This is one of TNC's requirements for I guess, UNEP's requirements that TNC has to fulfill. So we're kindly asking that you complete it, please. So I'm actually going to start in about 2 minutes because we have quite a bit to complete over the next 4 Fridays. I believe there may have been an error, or there was an error in the letter that was sent to you, which included Saturday, which said Friday the 14th, but it should actually be Friday the 13th. So the course is over the next 4 Fridays. Before I even go into introducing the course and what we're likely to do, I would like to say that today's class is very much focused on a lot of it, you know. So we're going to have a lot of discussion because we do have, you know, diverse. I mean, if you look at it, we have groups from the public sector. We also have from the private sector, and we also have from civil society organizations. So as we say, it's an academia. It's a mixed bag. So we intend to have a lot of discussion. As you know, it's very hard to be in an online space for a lot of hours. People get distracted, you're at work, you're going to be answering emails. I mean, we know it is what it is. So through what we refer to as tabletop discussions, we're going to have a lot of breakout rooms and a lot of discussion throughout the course. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I know there are still persons who are filling out the pre and post tests, and also as we go into the requirements of the course, would like to say that this too is a requirement for receiving the certificate. So please take some time and actually do the pre-test. The post-test will be different and will be like a real test under online exam conditions. So let's just go ahead. You could also take some time throughout the course of the day to look at what's in the chat and who is in the chat, and just something pretty interesting about them. So at this point, I will share my screen again. Okay, I'm just asking if persons are seeing my screen.
Yes, we're seeing your screen.
Yes.
Okay. You're seeing the chat box as well, in it? No? Okay. All right, so as UNEP and Nature Conservancy indicated, this course entitled EbA for Urban and Peri-urban Spaces, using nature-based solutions as a key climate change adaptation strategy for advancing sustainable development in Jamaica. All right, that's the name of the course. A little bit about the course. So the course is designed really to build the capacity and increase the knowledge of the practical application of EbA in the context of climate change. And when we talk about capacity, we're talking about, for example, our public sector and organizations within our public sector, such as our National Environment and Planning Agency, to organizations that work with natural resources involved in climate change adaptation, policy, development planning, like the Planning Institute of Jamaica. We're looking at our National Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. We have several persons, for example, from NWC. We're looking at organizations such as JSIP, among others. So working in those areas, but we're also looking to build the capacity of the private sector. And for example, those organizations that work, for example, with environmental impact assessments, as well as our civil society organizations, many of whom are involved in environmental management and climate change adaptation projects within their communities. So the course is intended to really explore how EbA can be used as a key climate change adaptation strategy, and also the use of EbA in disaster risk reduction. So obviously we will have hope, for example, from ODPM. What we're trying to do in this study is to show practical applications for us to come up at the end of this course with a sort of register of where all of these EBAs can be applied, the different techniques. Where is it possible for application? What you will notice today is that there is no representative from the Ministry of Local Government or the local authorities, because they're going to have their own session. The 15, what are they? The 15 local authorities, they will have their own session in this particular area. So we are incorporating a number of case studies. We would look, for example, at 1 and 2 videos over the course of the 4 days, and we will explore several topics. So in terms of the learning objectives, what knowledge are you expected to gain? What attitudes, for example, as well as what performance or what could you do at the end of this course? So we're really looking at, first and foremost, enhancing your knowledge. And for some of you, there are going to be areas within this course that you will be very much cognizant of, very much aware of. And therefore, we ask that you use your voice in bringing discussion to the table and in participating, not in providing inputs into the course. Of course, it will get boring if you have one trainer, so I'll be relying on you to add value and to enhance the knowledge through your own experiences and examples that you have. So we're understanding knowledge, understanding the contribution of ecosystems and biodiversity, the socioeconomic development, the importance and benefits of valuing natural resources, why we need to value natural resources, understanding the linkages between NRV and EbA, the benefits of using EbA in urban and peri-urban spaces, the rationale for incorporating EbA in development planning, the linkages and relationships among EbA, environmental conservation and management, DRR, climate change adaptation, the different EbA approaches and their applications. And this is where, for example, we will take a moment to come up with some sort of register. How do we think and where do we think we can apply these EBA approaches? So some real life Jamaica examples. How does it fit in with other tools of climate change adaptation? And this whole notion of mainstreaming and integrating EBA into national development policy planning processes. And we will also spend a moment to look a little bit at EBA and gender considerations. So in terms of performance, explaining the importance of EBA for climate change adaptation and sustainable development, be able to undertake at the broadest level, really defining the total economic value of a natural resource using the defined steps for doing that. Knowing how to apply EBA in urban and peri-urban spaces, be able to apply the techniques of NRB to undertake the valuation of ecosystems, know how to mainstream EBA in policy development processes, and be able to identify specific entry points for mainstreaming EBA. Knowing how the tools of EBA works, including the challenges, the opportunities, what are the baseline conditions for the use of these tools, and of course, again, where they can be applied. And of course, being able to analyze the benefits of these urban ecosystems for urban resilience and approaches to the application of EBA. And of course, in terms of attitude, just overall having an appreciation for the importance of protecting and sustainably using natural resources alongside and as part of socioeconomic development, and appreciate EBA as a tool of climate change adaptation on par with other development and approaches. So the course has 5 modules, and we are intended to complete those 5 modules over the next 4 Fridays. So module 1, which is today, which, as I said before, is sort of the base. So we're ensuring that everyone is on the same page. So as we move forward, we have this grounding base. And for many of you, module 1 is a module that you're very much aware of, which is why we're interspersing this module with a lot of discussion. So module 1, really looking at Jamaica's multi-hazard environment and setting the context for scaling up the use of EBA in Jamaica. Module 2 goes into a broad introduction into EBA. Module 3, we would look at natural resource valuation for EBA. Module 4, practical applications of EBA in urban planning and design. And module 5, creating the enabling environment for the mainstreaming of EBA. So this is a sort of, and this of course doesn't even cover half of what the actual course covers. But just to throw up for an EBA ABC chart, just to show some of the things and some of the content that we will be going into in the course. So for example, I think most of you would have gotten the agenda. I think everyone would have gotten the agenda for today. But in terms of some of the topics that we would look at on the EBA, for example, would include, the practical application. When we talk about practical application of EBA, looking at some of these would include the use of, for example, urban forests. Under B in the ABC chart, we have building solutions. We have urban farming and different types of urban farming. Open green spaces, building solutions, green corridors, natural inland wetlands, mangrove forests, amongst others. So we'll be spending some time on some of those. So module 1 has 6 topics: Jamaica's multi-hazard environment, a brief analysis of Jamaica's natural hazard landscape, state of Jamaica's biodiversity and ecosystems, climate change and its impact, future climate change projections, urban and peri-urban issues and challenges in Jamaica. And as you would see from module 1, I do not think that anyone is totally unfamiliar with the topics, okay? So before I move on, are there any questions, anything anyone would like to ask or say? And remember, you can use, so our Peter in the chat is this picture from Kentire, Hope River flooding, yes, of several years ago. Anyone, any questions, comments? We also will take a short break because I think, as you know how the course is structured, we finish at 4:30, 4:30, I believe. But we have a 2-hour break, but we'll also have a series of maybe a 10-minute break so that persons can grab a coffee. So you need to tell me when you would like that 10-minute break. Do you want it before we start? Or would you like it at some point after we start and before 12:30? So just for a show of hands, and I'm going to ask Anna to look at that for me. Yes, Peter, you do get the slides for sure. And I think we also will be sending out some other content. Ajani, Aline, is your hand up, Ajani? Or is that an old hand to say you completed the survey?
Yes, it's an old hand. Sorry about that.
No problem. That's not a problem at all. So the objectives of module 1, which focuses on, the objectives of module 1, we're looking at Jamaica's risk profile with respect to natural hazards, and we have some interesting exercises that we will ask you to do. Using examples, using examples how climate change is impacting the economic and social sectors of Jamaica. We're going to look at examining trends in the occurrence of hazards, loss and damage, defining what EbA is, examining some future climate change projections and scenarios, and sort of doing some, some foresighting into the possible impacts on Jamaica's development prospects as we look at future climate change adaptation. Describe urbanization, its causes and linkages with risk and resilience, and be able to identify urban and peri-urban challenges affecting Jamaica and some of the factors that are contributing to these challenges. So if we start off with a discussion and we think of the different types of hazards affecting Jamaica, very often in spaces like these, where we have a lot of persons who are experts in environment, in climate change, in disaster risk reduction, and working in this policy space in those particular areas, we tend to focus very much on natural hazards. But there are different types of hazards that we are impacted by. I mean, one can argue that countries like Jamaica, and in fact, all the countries in the Caribbean, we exist in this multi-hazard environment. So we're not just looking at natural hazards, but there are man-made hazards, and under natural hazards, you also have different categories. So you would have, for example, meteorological and hydrological hazards. You have geohazards, environmental hazards. And if we think of man-made, we have a range of categories under there as well. So you may have your technological, you have societal hazards, and then we have various biological hazards that we're exposed to. I mean, the most recent one being COVID-19. So very briefly, can we look at a sort of a sense of what hazard comes to mind for you? And if we take off, for example, tropical cyclones, rainfall, excess rainfall, if we delete floods and drought and What are some of the other hazards that we are exposed to in Jamaica? You can either raise your hand, including man-made and biological hazards. You can raise your hands or you can include in the chat. So am I speaking to myself or are you there? So Carisha, air pollution. Only air pollution. What about things like soil erosion? Where are my people from NEPA? There are several environmental hazards that we're exposed to. Sharks, oh, sorry. Shark socks, contaminated water. Yeah, so we're not mentioning, our Peter asked if we're not mentioning, yeah, we're not mentioning the regular ones, the ones we're most familiar with. You know, what are some of the other hazards that we're exposed to? So we see burning, we see warfare, we're seeing contamination of groundwater. Usually what comes to mind in spaces like these are the ones we're very familiar with, you know, hurricanes, tropical cyclones. But there are several others that we're exposed to. So like contamination of groundwater, lead poisoning, poor waste management, solid waste and wastewater, deforestation, improper sanitation causing groundwater contamination. We talk about pesticides in groundwater, noise pollution. Anything else? When we talk about societal hazards, what are some of the hazards we're referring to? For building construction. What are some of the hazards? What about crime? What about cybercrime? Sometimes we have things like societal unrest. People are not a hazard. Things like cybercrimes, things like scamming. We have in Jamaica, for example, last year, I think there were over, I believe about 448 road fatalities. So a man-made hazard is road accidents, for example. We have industrial accidents. Someone spoke about construction and poor construction, and the hazard there is that this leads to infrastructure failures, right? We're seeing underdeveloped community and low policy representation, poor waste management and disposal. What about things like aging infrastructure, right? I mean, we've had studies done over the years which speaks to some of the old infrastructure that we have. And it's not just in Jamaica, it's across the Caribbean. Many of the hospitals, many of the schools. During Hurricane Irma in 2017, for example, TCI lost all its schools because there was old and aging infrastructure in terms of those schools. Yes, it was a Cat 5, it was a Cat 4 when it got to TCI, but they lost all of their schools. And this is where the whole notion of building back better comes. Old building, asbestos in buildings, asbestos containing materials, earthquake risk, which is a big one. What about things like Sahara dust, for example? For several years, many of us, I mean, for several years in Jamaica, I don't think we heard about Sahara dust as we did in the last 3 to 4 years. Whereas in Trinidad, where I'm from, Sahara dust is a thing. You know, it happens every year, and everybody who has asthma gets an asthma attack or a few asthma attacks over that period. And it's been happening for about 15, 20 years. It's happening here now in a more significant way. So what about coral reef degradation? I have a whole heap of NEPA people here. Didn't see that one coming up. What about sargassum and invasive alien species such as the lionfish? Sagazam. So we are surrounded, we have transboundary movement of hazardous materials. So where's oil spills, we do have, for example, from time to time, we hear NEPA, we see in the news about NEPA and a spill and a fish spill. We have, I think I saw one in the chat. We have lifestyle diseases. So one of our health-related hazards, biological or health-related hazards that we are confronted with is non-communicable diseases. And we're seeing the impact of non-communicable diseases such as diseases of the circulatory system, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, cancers, etc., and the impact that that is having on our population, not only on life expectancy, but on quality of life generally. So this is just a graphic of the different types of hazards that we are exposed to. And this is coming from the International Science Council and UNDRR in their hazard definition and classification review technical report. And if we look at this, we see that, so what was pulled here was from that report with some of the hazards under these three major categories that Jamaica is exposed to. But are we missing anything? So like in Trinidad or in, I believe, Grenada, you do have things like, is it Grenada or something? Mud volcanoes. So anything that we're missing here? Under geohazards, for example, in St. Vincent, we could speak about the volcano if you know, for example, that's a geohazard there. In Montserrat. Anything else? You're pretty quiet.
Deforestation.
Deforestation, yes. Invasive species, invasive alien species, and we mentioned two, sargassum and lionfish. Are there any others that we can mention here?
Jamaican iguana.
But is that having an impact? No.
No.
Okay. So Camille spoke about sargassum, Nadine, invasive species, Carrion, the effects of ballast water from cruise ships, land degradation, inappropriate dumping or indiscriminate dumping of waste, pesticide-laden food produce. I don't know about the Cuban tree frog, but if someone would like, Rachel, you'd like to elaborate on that?
Hi, no, just it's a recently identified invasive species that we have here.
Okay, and Rachel, where are you from?
Still environmental.
Okay.
So they've been tracking it. You can, we use iNaturalist to update sightings of it. I don't know what else to say. It's a recently identified invasive.
Right, and that's a great thing, but I didn't know that, and I am sure there are some colleagues here who are not aware of that. Aisha, poor drainage and ineffective chemical management, particularly used and expired chemicals. Parisha, deer, is that still an invasive? Is it a hazard? Just asking. Overfishing. Parisha, again, speaking about pine trees that destroy ecosystem, reference to Blue Mountains Conservation Forest. If you want to add to that, please go ahead. We are also seeing wild ginger that is invasive. So any of these things, Shinar, if you want to speak about that, please do, or it would be great if you speak about that. And there's also an upcoming disease of sea urchins, Carrion. So those last, yes, the deer affect farmers, okay. Anything that we want to add there or elaborate on the sea urchins, etc.? Okay, but we're talking about Jamaica here, Adrian. Coal burning. All right, so we're gonna have a quick tabletop discussion because I want to do this exercise, very quickly to consider how each hazard affects Jamaica according to economic. Think about how the different hazards are there affecting Jamaica according to fiscal indicators such as impact on GDP, debt to GDP, social impact, and just picking out based on the area that you work in, what are the top 5 hazards affecting Jamaica and why? So we would have, I think, I'm trying to manipulate the screen and Zoom at the same time, but I actually want to put you into some, I'm going to stop share here and I'm going to try to open out some breakout rooms. And ask you to just go into them. Are you seeing the rooms?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and it automatically puts you into rooms. You see that, right? I haven't opened them as yet, but I'm going to share my screen again with the question, or with the hazards, the screen with the various hazards, and ask you to think about the 5 hazards that you think have the greatest impact on Jamaica. And we will be in that room for about 7 minutes. Everyone okay with that? So you're looking at this slide here, and then the discussion is around this. So you don't need to actually look at the slide because I think you all have opinions of the hazards that you are exposed, that we are exposed to. You all have opinions on which ones may have the greatest economic and social impacts, and just getting your consensus on the top 5. And it's 4 groups, there are 4 big groups. So it's really taking that 7 minutes to come up with the top 5. I'm going to open all the rooms now. And let me know if you are being placed in the rooms. I'll see that as well. All right, is everyone back?
Yes, we're back.
Yes.
Okay, so we had 4 groups. So anyone from group 1, just go so that we can document what is coming up from the different groups, and we could see if there are similarities or differences emerging there. Group 1, anyone can speak. Or you may have designated someone. Everybody is back? Okay, any group wants to go? Should I just call a name then? I'm seeing names in front of me. Orlando, Thomas, do you want to speak on behalf of your group? Am I on mute?
No, we can hear you.
Can hear you.
Oh, you're just ignoring me. Okay, good. Group 1, group 2,
No,
group
never
3,
got
group
to
4. I mean, this is like the simplest exercise you're gonna have to do.
I
It's
can
gonna
go.
happen
I can go
in
forward if
day
you'd like.
3.
I can speak for group 4 if you'd like.
Yeah. Who are you? I'm not seeing who you are.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm Duncan. I'm
Hi,
Duncan. My
Duncan.
name is Duncan. So group 4 had an interesting discussion. I joined a bit late. I didn't see the email in time, unfortunately. But the hazards we identified were water resources, landslides, hurricanes, coastal erosion, and crime and pollution. I know that's 6, but we kind of narrowed it down to those 6 that are the most important hazards as we see it.
Okay. Thank you. So that was group 4.
For group 3, I'm Howard Newell from National Water Commission.
Where
We
are you from, Duncan, before you go, Howard?
Sorry?
Where are you from, Duncan?
Oh, I'm from Kingston.
No, which agency?
Oh, I'm currently working for JAMPRO, but I joined this through the JYYC.
Okay, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we had tropical storm and hurricane, disease outbreak, poor farming practice, deforestation and landslide. That's chat 3, room 3.
And I want you to listen to what the groups have, because I want to get a sense from you as to if there is any disagreement among, with any of the hazards that a group would have identified, or if for some reason all groups deleted something that was particularly important. Group 1 or 2?
All right, for group 2, we had sea level rise, tropical cyclones, hurricanes, flooding. We kind of linked some of them with the tropical cyclones and hurricanes, linked it with flooding. We added coastal erosion, drought, and we also had crime and violence from societal hazards.
Thanks, Rose.
Right.
Anybody from group 1?
Hi, morning. Ramir Griffiths here from Water Resources Authority. What we discussed was meteorological impact in terms of hurricane, any tropical depression, drought. We highlighted the pandemic and what was the other one? Oil spills.
Yeah, biological. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we also said that the hydromet hazards would spin off, it could spin off or cause other hazards such as storm surges, landslides, etc. So they're interconnected as well.
Okay, so what we see for most of them, we see a sort of consensus around the meteorological and hydrological hazards. Only in group 4 did we see I think it was group 4, was it group 4 that spoke about earthquakes? Which group spoke about earthquakes? No group spoke about earthquakes?
Yes,
Well, group 2 said tropical
earthquake.
cyclones and
Group
hurricanes.
4 did mention earthquakes, but it wasn't
It
particularly
in the top
prominent.
5. I don't think any group mentioned earthquakes.
I just wanted to add that group 2 also had heat waves, droughts and heat waves, right?
Heat waves, they are an emerging, hazard, and it's extreme heat and heat waves. In fact, globally, we're now looking at naming heat waves in the same way that we name tropical cyclones. So that is something that the whole issue of heat waves is something that is gaining prominence. But I want to throw out a little question here, and it's something I'm gonna ask you to do. When you think about these hazards that you just presented, how do you think climate change may be influencing some of those hazards or the multi-hazard environment when we think about climate change? And would did the discussions in your group or any of the groups factored in the impacts of climate change and sort of the projections, the climate change projections that we're seeing? And I know there was recently, and I think I'd ask Nadine Brown to probably elaborate a little bit on this. Was there a new climate study done for Jamaica? Projections, an updated one recently?
Yes, so the State of the Jamaican Climate 2019 was just completed. It has not been shared yet with the public. I think
okay. So then,
just wrapping up the publishing of it.
Okay, no problem, Nadine. So when we get to that section,
Nadine,
I'm gonna ask you to speak a little bit about the previous report and some of the projections, not from the current report, seeing that that's still being completed, finalized, but just if you could elaborate on that a little bit as we go into the next section. So this was just a very, straight up, based on where we were, what are some of the hazards what are the top 5 hazards impacting Jamaica? And we're going to look at that a little differently as we think about climate change. Are your responses the same if you were to factor in the effects of climate change? So we did that little discussion. Did you consider, for example, the economic impacts in your discussion, as well as some of the social impacts in your discussion? I know someone mentioned landslides, and I think one of the things that I didn't hear coming out a lot about tropical cyclones and so on, but we do have a lot of rainfall events that are happening outside of the hurricane season as well, right? Agreed?
Right.
Or happening pre-hurricane season that are also causing significant impacts. So not really associated with tropical cyclones, but these excess rainfall events that are happening outside of the season, that's also having significant economic impact on the country. People did mention rainfall, groups did mention rainfall, but it was more within the context of tropical cyclones. So if we look a little bit at the overview of Peter, your hand is up.
No, just touching on what you said about rainfall. Our group 4, we did discuss that these, especially in Kingston, with the urban development that is going on, I mean, the rate of new developments and the existing old drainage, if it rains 1 hour, it's a hazard now for just, I mean, a single rainfall event can cause more damage than, and it's not due to climate change alone, it's from poor infrastructure. So we did touch on it a little bit.
Right, older infrastructure and infrastructure that does not take into account the new development that's happening. So I'm going to throw up this slide here, and it's a little big. I hope everyone is seeing it, what's on it. But this is just a sort of overview of our natural hazard landscape, and it's pulled from different documents, different sources, from development partners' work, from work done at the Planning Institute, work done from ODPEM, work done at NEPA, etc. What do you think, or is there any one of these statements? There are 9 statements here that sort of encapsulates the natural hazard landscape. Is there anything that is missing here that is of importance that should be, if you are looking at the natural hazard landscape in Jamaica, is there anything that you would want to see here that was not included? So just a moment, I'm sure everyone is seeing this screen. Is there one that you don't necessarily agree with, or that so in a nutshell, this is what our natural hazard landscape looks like. Is there anything that we could add to that? Nobody?
Yes. Would like to add the crime rate currently
So we're
in
looking at
Jamaica.
natural hazard landscape. So we're moving away from the multi-hazard now, and we're kind of getting into the meat of the matter of the course. So we're sort of zeroing in now on the natural hazard landscape and looking at our natural hazard landscape here in Jamaica in a nutshell. So we're saying we're susceptible to a range of primary and secondary hazards. And in your groups previously, you highlighted in your mind, based on your work, based on your knowledge and experience, the top 5 hazards that were impacting Jamaica. And we came up with at least 12 different hazards that you identified were of importance or significance. So now we're looking at this natural hazard landscape. What is missing here? What could we add here? I mean, if we're showing this to someone and saying, this is us, our natural hazard landscape in a nutshell, what is missing? What would you want to elaborate on? And Dwight Williams, I see your hand up. As you speak, please indicate your organization and for me. So Rose, for example, when you spoke a short while ago, because I know you, I forgot to make you see where you're from. So sorry about that, but I've known Rose forever. So she's from Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. You may want to elaborate on that, Rose, the department.
On what I said?
No, just the department you're from.
Oh, natural development, National Development Planning Policy and Monitoring.
Okay, thanks, Rose. So now we go to Dwight and then Tino, because you have some comments.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd just like to expand on 6.6 that states that more than 60% of the country's population live within. I would like to expand that to include the fact that most of our major infrastructure is also located within that
Right.
within that proximity, and even closer. For example, our two major airports, our refineries, a lot of our schools, hospitals, and so forth. So I would just expand that particular comment to include that part.
Right, so our economic and social infrastructure is also located within that 5 kilometers of the coastline. And in fact, I think the figure for the economic infrastructure, which would be like your hotels and so on, is about 80% of the economic infrastructure is really on the coastline as well.
Agreed.
Yes.
Where are you from, Dwight?
Oh, sorry, I'm from Nepal.
Nepal, okay. Tino?
Hi, good morning. I couldn't see exactly all the text there clearly, but one of the things in terms of the deforestation and the, I would say, the disregards to the natural environment with every aspect. Everybody just cuts down everything, burns everything, throws stuff outside and stuff. It affects us in every single areas. So no matter what aspect is there, when we don't have the natural vegetation in its right state, to keep the soil together, then you're gonna have landslides. When we're building up our new developments and we don't take those things into consideration, it affects every single thing. Because when you put in new drains that are okay, and then if it is full with silt or mud and plastic bottles and other stuff, it affects everything. And in closing, I'm from the Kingston and St. Andrew Bee Farmers Association, so you can see why I am a bit more geared towards the natural, biology of the place.
Okay, thanks, Tino. Romario?
Hi, morning again, everyone. For me, what I would add to the list that is there is pollution. Based on my capacity as employee from Water Resource Authority, pollution of our water is a big challenge, and if it is not managed properly, then it can have serious economic impacts, social as well.
Okay, thanks, Romario. Anyone else? One of the things that we do know is that we are, as a country, highly exposed. And according to the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery at the World Bank, Jamaica is considered to be the third most exposed country in the world to multiple hazards, with over 96% of the country's GDP and population at risk from 2 or more hazards. This also, for example, Moody's in 2020 spoke about the most vulnerable countries globally. Of course, the 20 most vulnerable countries, more than half of them are small island states across the Caribbean and the Pacific, with these countries bearing annual losses, average annual losses between 2.1% and 20.1% of their respective GDPs every year. And the countries that Moody's referenced in the Caribbean were Belize, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Hurricane risk is considered to be more significant in Jamaica than earthquake risk because of the average annual losses estimated or percentages of GDP estimated for hurricanes and earthquake. I think we spoke about this already, that Jamaica is particularly vulnerable to drought, but we also need to remember that it's impacted by excess rainfall events, which may occur throughout the year and outside of tropical cyclones. And of course, the prominence of our earthquake risk is something that we excuse me, we need to mention.
Liz, before you move on, Damien has his hand up.
Damien, is that an old hand or the same hand?
Oh, it was just an hand up. I was just asking you in regard to that list that you have up. We didn't look at temperature, rising temperature, and not only in the sense of drought, because from the biological standpoint, when you have rising temperature, you have species that normally never occur at a certain geographical zone and it move up. So you get like pests, like diseases with mosquitoes and stuff moving up. So I was just asking you on that list that you had for Jamaica natural hazard, since rising temperature is natural, and we have a lot of species that are sensitive to it. So I was just adding that angle or asking that question.
Increases in temperature, and
right.
that's
not
going to
just
get
drought.
worse.
Yeah, right.
As a result of climate change. But what if we were to look at a little more and interrogate this hazard, risk, and vulnerability in Jamaica? So we have agreed that we live in this multi-hazard environment. There are several hazards that we're exposed to: natural, biological, man-made. But what is driving the extent of the impacts that we feel from these natural hazards? What is causing some of these natural events, such as a rainfall event, to actually turn into what we would say are disasters? So what does our exposure and vulnerability look like in Jamaica? And when we talk about risk we need to recognize is not just a function of the hazard or the extent of the hazard or the degree of the hazard, but the impact of these natural events are also affected by our exposure and vulnerability. So what is our exposure? What makes us exposed? And on the slide before, we actually see that as a country, our location, geology, and geography by its very nature makes Jamaica highly exposed to these natural hazards. But what is driving our vulnerability? Why are our assets on the ground reacting the way that they are reacting based on the hazards that we're being exposed to? Shamoy, go ahead.
Okay, Shamoy McLean, Climate Change Division. Our most recent planning practices where we are paving a lot of we're doing developments, and a lot of the developments are being paved. So now if we have situation where we have extreme rainfall, and we don't even have to have extreme rainfall, where we have poor drainage, then that will impact the flow of the water that would originally infiltrate in the natural space without the concrete and bricks and so on. Then you're going to have this runoff into the already poor drainage infrastructure, which will cause more flooding. And because of also the poor garbage disposal, more of that goes into the drainage systems, into the rivers, and then we have this whole snowball effect happening.
Okay. Thanks for that. And I think Nadine wants to add to that discussion as well. Nadine Brown, you never said where you were from. And because I know you pretty well.
Nadine Brown from the Planning Institute of Jamaica. In addition to what Shimoy just said, I think one of the main reasons why our infrastructure or our surroundings is responding to the impact of these hazards in the manner that it is that our infrastructure, for one, is not designed to take on what climate change has caused. So, and also we have not been incorporating our climate information into our decision-making process. So our infrastructure is not fit for purpose. They're not built to take on excess rainfall. So we have the flooding on top of the factors that Shimoy just mentioned, which is our solid waste issues, etc. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we're seeing hazards becoming disasters. So our physical infrastructure is not built to respond to these types of hazards.
I want to interrogate a little bit a comment that you made, Nadine. You said that climate information is not being, I would say, I'm not sure if you use the word, sufficiently included in developmental processes. I want you to share with us in your, based on your experience, what developmental processes are we not necessarily including climate information sufficiently in? And just, what sort of development processes are we not doing that in? And what types of climate information should we be looking at?
So yes, I should qualify it by saying sufficiently. So we have been, since we have created information such as our climate scenarios, we have been pushing for the inclusion of this information that is now available to us and other types of information that would have come out of several climate change projects. We have stepped up our efforts then to include the information into our development planning, but we're thinking of like our road infrastructure or drainage infrastructure. We can now look at our climate scenarios, which go up right up to the end of the century to 2100, and look at what type of rainfall events we'll be having. How will or drainage be impacted by extreme rainfall, and even the carrying capacity of these drainage. We can now incorporate that sort of information into those types of decision-making processes. That's one example that readily comes to mind. And now that we have these climate scenarios that look at various sectors and the impact of climate change on various sectors, we can now incorporate them and make smarter decisions where our infrastructure is concerned.
Okay. So from a practical point of view, I see your hand, Delamo, and I will come to you shortly. From a practical point of view, I know we have some private sector entities consultants with us, and you do EIAs, for example. Are you including climate information and some of this data and information in that EIA process? And I also want to throw it out to our team at NEPA. And I see, Rose, your hand went up as well, so I don't know if it's in response to this. But our team at NEPA, and if, for example, in our EIA guidelines, which I know over the years continue to be revised in keeping with, the changes that we're seeing, do you now require, or is climate information and climate analyses now required in these, in the EIA process, for example? So while I wait on my NEPA team, I'll take Delamo and Rose Perrin. Delamo, you can go ahead.
All right, so Delano Malcolm representing National Water Commission.
You're Delano or Delamo?
Malcolm. Delano. It's a NO. It's a
Oh, you
type in
put
NO.
okay. So
Yeah, it's a NO. Right. So I was looking on since we are located within geographical risk belt, right? As a country. As it relates to natural disasters. I'm saying should our risk management procedure and policies set out by the lawmakers be more focused on how climate change influence the development of the economy? I was looking on that aspect of it.
I think that's what Nadine was alluding to, that, you know, making greater use of available climate information. She alluded to the fact that the climate scenarios go all the way to 2100, you know, the turn of the next century, and really for development prospects to ensure that they are more sustainable, taking into account this kind of information.
Right, because if naturally where we're located, then we cannot do nothing much to change that aspect of it as it relates to natural disaster. But how do we manage those risks and better able put ourselves in a position so we can be more resilient when those natural disaster occurs. So I was looking into that aspect, focusing more so on the policies and the policymakers.
Okay, what I'm gonna also ask Nadine to do, I'm sorry for picking on you, Nadine, is to probably
Okay.
put the link for the State of the Jamaica Climate, the previous report, the first one, in the chat, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Yeah, because that's a very, it's a very rigorous publication. I think it's a very good publication, and I think it's something that as persons who work in this climate space and with these natural resources should really have access to. I imagine quite a number of you have access to that version, but just in case. Rose?
I want to endorse this issue of the paving of the roads because of these hard surfaces. And I don't know if it's because we don't do enough sustainability appraisals, SEAs and so on, EIAs, and the climate information which has been referred to. I don't know if the information is not presented, if it's a problem with how the information is presented, in that people may not be able to interpret the data that they see so that they can consider these when they're dealing with developments. I see that a lot of times the developers, they are given the conditions by the parish councils and NEPA, and yet they ignore. One person would say that he's not able to get details. So I don't know if that is an issue, in that the information is not presented in a detailed format. It's more on a macro level. So I just wanted to bring that to bear. And that whole thing about the poor design of spaces has become a serious problem, because developments are placed in one area, because it affects other areas. We see, for example, some areas are built up, the water course changes, and then the water tries to find some way out, and it affects communities, causing floodings and so on. So I really endorse what was said.
Thank you, Ruth. Adrian?
Yeah, just coming off of the back of that, Adrian Watson from Gene. It's sometimes it's also trickling down into what the market wants. And one of the questions that I'm thinking that needs to be asked is how agile or society is to what we demand in terms of the type of housing infrastructure, the type of communal infrastructure that we demand, and how that plays a role in what policymakers do. Because at the end of the day, like for example, I live in CV Gardens, and when the road construction at 3 miles was being done, the level of Spanish Town Road dipped about by a few inches, right? Because of the resurfacing of the road. All of the flood waters that used to go into Sandy Gully or go down to 3 miles now comes over into CV Gardens. And that new road that connects Marcus Garvey Drive through CV Gardens to the shipping belt, that area gets flooded, right? It never used to happen before that road was in quote developed, and there's a lot more hard surfaces there now than there was before. Like for example, where I used to take the bus at the entrance of Seaview, it was a very small soakaway zone still, but it's now gone. It's now paved over, and I'm like, we demand we tend to demand new roads, better roads, and the response to that is a hard asphalt driven development, and it's impacting because then the drainage in Seaview is not enough to kind of cover and absorb all of that. So it's how do we build it, become agile enough to build in ecologically sensitive infrastructure that mimics the natural biodiversity, the natural ecosystem services. It's a mouthful, I know, but yeah, I'll hand over back.
So, I mean, it's all critical to what we'll be doing further on as we look at the EBA and the various solutions that EBA provides, because the truth is, if development is to be sustainable, we shouldn't have, as I would say, a well-paved road and run the risk of then in that same community that you're putting that well-paved road for greater access, you're causing flooding downstream. So the question is, how do we in various developmental processes take into account the natural environment and take into account ecosystems and look at higher levels of sustainability, right? Because that's what we're trying to achieve. We don't want to have a paved road at a flooded community, or the result of a paved road being a community that floods each time we have a 15-minute downpour of rain. In fact, a few months ago, I think in October, I was at a conference. I was at a conference at the Pegasus, and it was an international conference. They had quite a bit of persons from overseas, and we were right after the end of that day, we were heading to Devon House, and the entire Trafalgar Road was flooded, but we were not even aware that it rained a lot, because where we were at Pegasus, it rained, but it didn't seem to rain that much that Trafalgar Road and what's that road by Devon House called? I can't remember the name of that road. What is that road?
Waterloo.
Devon Road, sorry.
Waterloo?
Trafalgar Road, Waterloo Road, and the road behind Devon House was completely flooded. And there was extensive traffic because of that flooding. So these are questions that we bring to bear. You know, how do we effectively incorporate environmental issues into our development planning? And I think it's something that Nadine started the ball rolling on, because not every change requires an EIA, for example. So how do we ensure that our local authorities in approving projects also incorporate environmental issues, also look at ecosystems, also take into account climate information? And I see Dwight's hand is up, so go ahead.
Yes, thanks again. Dwight from NEPA. A lot of the questions being asked in terms of climate change and how it is incorporated in our development approval process. I know from the EIA report that the consultants are required to identify risk associated with climate change and the associated mitigative measures that would address those risks. But let us be a little more practical now and put some examples of how climate change strategies are actually incorporated in our approvals from a NEPA standpoint. So it really begins from what we call our development plans, right? A lot of time you see development plans being prepared, and we are requiring that these development have incorporated lots of green spaces. So we would seek to ensure that when a particular lot is being developed, we talk about building footprints and plot area coverage. So we would require that approximately 66% of the lot is not covered by the building, for example. That's one example. And it's really to create more green space to ensure percolation, and so you wouldn't have flooding onto the roadways. We know that the roadways and the existing drainage is not sufficient. So we want as much of the water to be captured on the site, for example. So plot area coverage is used. We also, well, let me back up. The design of the building for starters, we ensure that the buildings are using natural lighting as much as possible, natural ventilation and so forth, to reduce the use of electricity and fossil fuel and all of that. And then we talk about plot area ratio. We also want to ensure that the water is captured. We talk about rainwater harvesting. So we want developments to be able to capture the water on the site, and this could be used to for water in the lawns and other uses that the water can be used for. We also,
I want to stop you there, Dwight, because
yes.
I mean, let's say as a layperson, when I drive around Kingston and I see the new high rises, several of them, I don't necessarily see natural lighting. They barely have windows. So I'm throwing that out to say to you, whilst this is sort of a quote unquote policy decision, are we seeing it played out in practice? Are we seeing, for example, you know, one of the groups spoke about increasing heat, and are we seeing the use of more green space within our developments? We've seen, you know, if we think about spaces like Barbican, for example, we have a lovely new road, but at the same time, you know, we didn't capitalize as a country on opportunities where instead of having that huge culvert, I don't know what you call it, it's like a huge cement thing in the middle of the road, separating part A from part B, could we have thought, for example, of creating an urban forest? So I see what you're saying, and yes, we applaud the efforts of NEPA, but how are we getting those into real practice? You know, do we have any best practice examples of, say, a new development that has, you know, used its green space, you know, so well, you know? So actually in doing this particular project, on behalf of, you know, TNC and so on, I became more attuned. I started to become more attuned in terms of, okay, so all of these new developments, I mean, how are they incorporating all of these EbA solutions? And, you know, we speak and we talk about, you know, we see several cranes up in the air and we see a lot of new developments. And you're looking around and you're saying, but okay, I kind of see a dead palm tree over there on this particular one. So, you know, we have several opportunities for EbA, and we do have the enabling environment, as you speak about, Dwight. but where is it happening? I mean, do you have any example that you could share with us? A picture you could bring next week to say, listen, this is how this particular development looks. And this is where we want to go. This is it in practical terms. Do you have anything like that?
Yes, yes. There are several examples where we have sustainable developments being going up in and
Can
around.
you give us one, like say one in Kingston?
I don't want to call the names now, but as I said, we probably could share some images next time.
Okay,
But
so next week when we
But
go
just to say though, there are several buildings with adequate lighting, man. Yes, there are, and also in terms of parking, some of my colleagues earlier spoke about drainage, but we no longer approve developments with hard surface parking. We're talking about semi-permeable parking and that. I think landscaping also. You mentioned dead palm trees, but a lot of the developments now, they have to come in with landscape plans to be approved by the agency. So a lot of things in terms of strategies to address climate change is being implemented practically at this time. I know some of the older developments may not have them, but going forward, that is the strategy that we're using. Green spaces, soft-grid parking, rainwater harvesting, natural lighting, and to ensure that we have a sustainable development, not just on the individual lot, but as a community. So those are some of the strategies that we have.
Okay, and hopefully as we do this course, there could be some additional strategies added to that list of strategies to totally enhance the environment. One of the things is I have NEPA here, and you speak about the parking spaces, and you know they allow for, you know, those blocks that you use now everywhere.
Semi-permeable
Great.
parking.
I applaud it, but you know, certain things were designed when we talk about gender by men. So please remember.
You're talking about the heels.
Yes, and the high heel shoes, and we
Yes,
have to be
yes.
falling in the holes and
Yes.
smashing up the shoes. So let us suggest that you change the guideline a little bit to say that there is a one road where it is
yes.
not the blocks, you know?
It's a matter of design, and we got those sort of feedback from time to time, and we are saying to developers, to the architects, to look into new designs to accommodate persons, even a slender walkway in between those. So
right,
that
what it really requires is a slender walkway.
yes,
So I have a problem at my house as well, where the same thing, when I'm getting to my car, I am falling in the hole. You know, so you have to be kind of. So I see a lot of hands up. I see Rachel, I see Christina, and I see Camille. So thanks for that intervention, Dwight. And we look forward for, as we go into EBA, just to throw up, you know, bring some of those designs. You don't have to tell us where they are, so that we could throw it up and we could see some of the EBA approaches in action, because that's what we want to do in this course as well as develop a register of where there can be additional applications or additional EBA tools and techniques that can be incorporated. So that was very useful. Thanks. Rachel and Christina. Rachel first.
Okay, so I have real issues with parking and the designs we have. One, we don't use elevated parking enough. It's not mandated, so we deforest and remove huge green spaces and create all kinds of other problems by not using elevated parking and insisting on that in urban settings for new developments. And back to the design of those, the drainage, they're not designed for people with disabilities. They're not, the access and use of those things are not practical, I find, for a lot of average people that, not average, a lot of people with disabilities that need, utilize those spaces. So I have a real issue with our urban design when it comes to parking.
Okay, so Rachel, where are you from?
Yeah, environmental.
Yeah, environmental. Okay, and Christina next.
Hi, I'm Christina Doherty from Environmental Solutions Limited, and I'm touching on a little bit of what Rachel said. I find that one thing that really exacerbates our vulnerability in Jamaica is the limited people-centered approach to development. You find that a lot of these developments are happening and they are not inclusive of, like what Rachel said, vulnerable groups. And even when there is a hazard and people are affected, there is still limited spaces for those vulnerable groups. So for example, all our shelters are basically schools, which would then make children unable to go to school and have reduced access to education. These centers are not, they're not designed with gendered needs. So they don't have particular bathroom for women who are breastfeeding, women who are pregnant, etc. So I think a lot of times we put a lot of development thinking about the ideal situation and not taking into consideration real world and what's actually happening on the ground and the persons who utilize the space and are intended to utilize the space.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for that intervention. And just to give you a real life example of where this thing, this whole notion of shelters is taking place, is in Dominica. Following Hurricane Irma, what they now have is just dedicated shelters across the country. So there are no longer schools. There are these dedicated shelters, because what Hurricane Maria also brought up for them was the need for things simply as different bathrooms for males and females, the whole notion of breastfeeding, because in that particular time, it wasn't just a few communities that were vulnerable, it was an entire country that became vulnerable, and you just saw all the different needs, you know, persons with disabilities, etc., etc. So that too, thank you for that intervention in terms of how we design spaces and what we do and how we think about development, and this too in terms of the impacts of climate change and what is possible. Rachel, your hand is up again. I see Duncan. Duncan?
No, sorry.
Duncan?
Yes. So something I've noted being increasingly more discussed, like especially on YouTube. They're like Climate Town and like Our Changing Climate, and a few specific channels that are dedicated to urban transport. So like biking and this kind of thing. Is that the focus on building for the assumption of cars is kind of terrible. The more parking you put in a city, the more you encourage people to drive. The less people will take public transport, and it's like a self-fulfilling cycle. Whereas if it was a case where public transportation was encouraged, you'd start to see less driving. And if you were to make it such that it's harder for people to drive, more people will take public transport just based on the convenience factor. But yeah, like as it comes to parking in general, I'm personally of the belief there should be less parking, not more.
Okay, but we also have to look at the entire environment in which we live, because what you're proposing and what we see in many of our metropolitan cities, I'm not sure we can see in our cities and our towns at this point. And that's why it's important that we look at a multi-hazard environment, because we can't fix one element without fixing several other things. So think about me riding a bike and you're riding a bike and it's great. But then when we're in a car, we are harassed at a traffic light. So think about being on a bike. I mean, we have to deal with several other hazards that we're exposed to, such as things like crime and violence, before we even begin to think about. So safety is a huge issue in Jamaica, and I think two of our groups.
I see what you mean.
Mentioned. So we can't always take something that works somewhere else and bring it to us, because they may not suffer or not suffer, for want of a better word. They may not be part of the reality that we are part of. So we also need to think about those things and do things in stages and steps and hope that maybe by 2050, we would be in that space where, we have not just green spaces, but we also have what you refer to as transportation systems, etc., that would accommodate more people.
Could I make a quick comment and then I'll pass the floor?
I just want to say that Romario says, right, well, Kamar, we need to be careful how we compare developed versus developing countries. The realities are different, which is what I was trying to also say. And good Romario, he says, you've made a good point, but Jamaica would need to upgrade its transportation systems, invest in trains, promote carpooling, improve upon public transportation systems, taking into account time management.